Konstantin, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Mr. Hamid Sharif. We could hear loud and clear this time. It's all good. Thank you for the invitation, first, to my colleague and friend, Dr. Nudrat Piracha. Congratulations for launching the International Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Prevention, ICADRP. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you, and really a pleasure to spend a few minutes today, this afternoon or morning. ADR Center, which I represent, will be honored to work with the ICADRP in collaboration with you to assist in what is required for the Pakistan mediation program. And I have some slides prepared. Before sharing my presentation, let me just share greetings from ADR Center CEO, Leonardo D'Urso, my dear friend and colleague, and also a feeling of gratitude for sharing the panel with Professor Rekshi, Judge Westerfield. Good morning, Judge. Justice Anwar, and of course the online mediation global expert Colin Rula, as well as all the other colleagues and experts joining this event. I am sharing the slides on screen. I hope you have a chance to see them. And I have 3 points I would like to make. The first one refers to the fact that mediation is not a panacea, it's just an option, and is to be seen as such. It's appropriate indeed in many cases. The second point refers less to opinions and more to data, and I would like to share data from the Italian Ministry of Justice, but not only, just to see which models work. And I have a book here. It's the Variegated Landscape of Mediation, written by Manon Schoenville, and she writes in this book that there are 60 countries, 60 states surveyed here, and most of them have passed new legislation, and no 2 countries seem to have implemented the same definition or the same mediation system. So there is a lot of discussion about all of these things, and this couldn't be a better moment to have that conversation in Pakistan. I would like to share some best practices from Italy, but not only. And I would like to close by speaking how is this relevant, if even, for Pakistan, and how could any lessons learned could be applicable for Pakistan. While I have usually a full day to talk about these things, I was told that I have 10-15 minutes, so good luck to me. I would like to probably give you an overarching presentation over all these things, and I'll be very happy to continue the conversation at any point in time. First point, mediation fundamentals. As we all heard, mediation is part of the ADR spectrum, more appropriate dispute resolution than alternative dispute resolution for all the reasons mentioned. I would like to give you a perspective that refers to world population that keeps growing, and I would like to give you another perspective with regard to the travel explosion, probably not the last couple of years, but nevertheless, look at the difference between now and just 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I'd like to give you another perspective with respect to how we communicate. It's incredible, 10, 11 new users every single second using internet for the first time. So the point is that everything is changing, the world, the people, and therefore the justice system and the approach to justice. All the paradigms that were relevant just 100 years ago, or a couple of hundred years ago, now probably they're not so relevant. So the point is that there is a tension between the government expectation to deliver justice in time and the flooding of all cases. I think Pakistan is looking at more than 1 million pending cases, if not close to 2 million in terms of a case backlog. So it's just like this, you know, having a wide boulevard, but with so many streets that it's impossible to use it. So the question is, what do you do? do you build more roads? Do you have, fewer vehicles, or just tell people that you should drive only on even days and so on and so forth to create some barriers, or create alternatives so that people can reach point B from point A by contemplating different options. If it's a morning, perhaps probably option A works. If it's an afternoon, probably option B. So depending on different parameters, one option could be more appropriate than others. And that was implemented in the US judicial system in what we call the modern ADR, but I would like to just highlight that mediation and ADR are probably older than the modern justice as we know it. It's just that the modern ADR was introduced in the past 40 to 50 years. And just to make the first point, mediation is one mechanism on the left-hand side of the screen that basically is helping parties to maintain control over both process and outcome. The problem, everyone, is that it's tough to build agreements. That's the problem. It's not easy. It's really difficult, and take it from someone who's been mediating for 20 years now, and I'm doing this full time, and it's really difficult to build agreements because people have tried to settle and they were not able to. Sometimes they tried for years, and they're asking, what can you do for us, really? I mean, we've been trying this for so many years, and how are you able to help us? So that's the big discussion about mediation skills and what many call the magic of mediation. So the point is that mediation is not a panacea, it's just one option, and let's just look at it as such. It's obviously something to be considered, and obviously skills are required by mediation stakeholders, by justice stakeholders, business stakeholders, and then community stakeholders, and then so on and so forth, all corners of fields of practice in industry and life, social life, as really an option to help build some progress in difficult conversations. In terms of the justice, the multi-door concept was successfully implemented not only in the US but in many other countries, and it's really a mechanism that Colin and others will tell us, and Judge Westerfield, that so many cases get settled before the judge reaches the point of ruling final judgment. So that's probably the reform that countries like Romania, where I'm coming from, and others who are in development are trying to achieve. So that's the first point. The second point I would like to make is refers to the Italian mediation model. And let me just tell you for a second that these are the latest statistics that Leonardo, my colleague, kindly shared with me. Just the Rome office of ADR Center managed some close to 1,500 cases. The first semester, 1,500 mediations, the first semester of this year. And the Rome office is one of the 55 offices of ADR Center. And ADR Center is one of the 575 providers of mediation services in Italy. It's quite an achievement for a country to report such numbers. It's really impressive when you think about the fact that parties are paying for the service themselves, as opposed to the Turkish model where, at least for the first part, the government is covering the costs. As you see on screen, most cases are coming from what is called the first mediation meeting, which is part of the procedure. Otherwise, the parties may be sanctioned by a judge if they don't attend this first meeting. But otherwise, there are cases triggered by judge referral, voluntary attempt by parties themselves who have the appetite to engage in mediation, as well as mediation contract clauses. But just look at the numbers: 800 versus 170 versus 240 and versus 20. So now this is a long discussion about how the modern mediation evolved in time. We don't have time to do that, this conversation. Hopefully we may have other opportunities to discuss. Just to tell you, there are more than 22 years of different trials and errors, at least in the region, in Europe, where I'm coming from, with a mediation directive, which was approved in 2008, so 14, 15 years ago. And this directive said 15 years ago that there has to be a balanced relationship between mediation and judicial proceedings. Balanced. Now, we ask different people what balanced means, they will tell us different things, I know. But again, think about it. Right now, there are still, 15 years after, 99% of the cases in the courts being litigated and way less than 1% of the cases being mediated. So is this balanced? Again, we may discuss, but it doesn't look like it. So the point is that Europe is trying, but we're not there yet. What I will tell you now is that Italy made this possible, and I have some concrete data that I would like to show. Basically, most countries are living in the bottom right corner of this chart. This chart has how many mediations as opposed to cases being litigated versus success rate. So we have good success rates reportings and very low number of cases in most countries. And the question is, how can we get this report, how can we get more and more countries in the quadrant where we have many mediations with high success rate? That's the conversation. So what I can tell you now is that there are 4 main recourses to mediation. May it be mandatory or making it the first meeting mandatory, may it be voluntary, parties themselves would like to engage, may it be because judges are referring parties to mediation, or because parties are including mediation clauses or ADR clauses in their contracts. And then the supply side has another dimension with mediation centers or individual mediators, which is a huge discussion in Europe. I will tell you that in Italy, you cannot provide services on your own. You need to be part of a mediation center where there have to be at least 5 mediators. Look at the numbers. 1% of mediations happening in Italy because of mediation contract clauses. So the private sector wouldn't use it. They would not use those contract clauses. So there is no mediation because of that. 4% because of judge referral. Yes, after 20 plus years of promotion and meetings like this, and many judges saying, yes, we support mediation. But at the same time, it's hard. We don't have the time to refer properly, not at least properly. Instead of drafting a decision to refer, I may decide the case and finalize it, get it off the docket. So there is a huge conversation about capacity to refer and resources. 10% voluntary recourse, 85% because of the required first meeting, which is part of the legislation. And that, everyone, created a market of more than 1 million cases, 1 million mediations in the past 10 years. And then, of course, that's because there are 500 mediation centers, more than 20,000 mediators, professional mediators. They get paid, by the way. There is a sustainable financial model. Without a sustainable financial model, there is no mediation. Research demonstrates. Many training institutions and trainers. So just to give you some numbers and hopefully get this second point finalized, there are many cases, 1.5 million cases in the past 10 years. Lesson is that there has to be a little nudge so that you encourage, even if that means mild economic sanctions, so that people will actually attend. When I say people, I don't only refer to representatives of the private sector companies or citizens. I also refer to people as representatives of public sector institutions. Because let's not forget about the public sector. Governments have been approving legislation and parliaments have been adopting policies, but without really saying that we're using this. So how can we encourage governments to actually start by, lead by example and start using this, and then the private sector and the citizens may follow. That's probably the shift in the mindset that has to happen. But again, conflict theory tells us that the most powerful parties are reluctant to engage in dialogue, and governments are powerful. So, a lot of things to be reported, really not the time, but just to know that there are public mediation centers in Italy as well as private. Public as in centers established by bar associations who are providing mediation services, and chambers of commerce are also establishing mediation centers, and that's helpful because you don't only rely on the private providers, you have public providers who are able to take on the volume if it gets there. So then you cannot make this mandatory step without ensuring that there is enough supply for it. Success rate, you will be surprised, 50% or so, even more, depending on the types of cases. So even if it's voluntary, it may go up to 60 or 70 or maybe even 80, but there are no big differences. And that's a huge lesson learned. Lawyers attending physically more than 80% of the cases, may they be voluntary or mandatory. So they are the gatekeepers of the process, and that's so important. And guess what? For the types of cases, only 15% of the civil and commercial cases they have to go through this mandatory scheme. For those types of cases, there are less cases in the courts by 34%. And that's really the key performance indicator that proves that this is a good model. So there is a demand by this initial meeting and there is supply. They have to work together. You cannot have mediation unless you ensure both sides. High demand without high quality supply is going to be a disaster, and perhaps I'll tell you the Romanian story at a different moment. This is the model. Basically, the parties get to meet for this first meeting. They get to decide if they want to engage in the full process voluntary. They don't have to pay the full mediation fees unless they decide again to engage in the process voluntary. The first meeting has to be organized within 30 days. So these are all the safeguards referring to access to justice are there. And then again, you can access this presentation because there are so many nuts and bolts and details of what actually makes this first meeting effective. So many countries have attempted, and Romania is one of them, and we did not achieve a good solution because of a number of reasons. And really getting the right formula is the way to success, because if you don't get all the details in place, then it may be that that's not helpful. Okay, so there is upcoming reform. No time, I'll have to wrap now. Lawyers have an active role in mediation, and that's the Italian model. 1 minute, Nudrat, I promise, just to say that there is a virtuous cycle for developing a effective mediation policy. This cycle is informed by best standards, adopted, implemented, monitored, and then reassessment. Just to say that requires a very thorough stakeholder analysis, just to understand what are the functions of the system and what are the relationships between all stakeholders, yes, bar association included, and judges and so many others. And if you create a matrix depending on how mandatory is the service versus how let's say centralized is the system, then you can map different countries on a map, and you will see, and I'm just showing you without making too many comments, that most countries are leading towards the model on the top right area, where there is a little bit of effort required, but not mandatory mediation, and some regulation, some level of regulation. UK started discussing regulation, more and more efforts required. So finally, you need effective policy, you need capacity, a sustainable business model, continuous monitoring, and an integrated feedback loop to get the right formula implemented. Finally, yes, this is about access to justice, as one of the speakers mentioned. It's about the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm closing by congratulating everyone for this event and wishing you the best of luck with implementing innovation.